Hansel and Gretel by the Brothers Grimm. At the edge of a vast forest lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and their two children. The little boy was called Hansel, and the little girl Gretel, and the family were so poor they had hardly anything to eat. Even worse, a great famine was threatening the land, and the woodcutter was finding it very hard to make a living. One evening, when the children had gone to bed, the man sighed and said to his wife,
"What is to become of us? How are we going to feed our children when we don't even have anything for ourselves?"
"Well, I have a good idea," answered his wife. "Tomorrow, early in the morning, we will take the children to the thickest and darkest place in the forest. We will light a fire for them and give them each a piece of bread. Then we will go to our work and leave them there. They will not be able to find the way back home, and we will be rid of them."
"No,"
said the man.
I don't want to do that. How could I abandon my children in the forest? The wild animals will eat them."
"Oh, you fool!" exclaimed his wife. "If we won't do it, all four of us will starve. Is that what you want?" She would give him no peace until he gave in. Hansel and Gretel were so hungry that they could not sleep, and consequently they heard everything the woman said. Gretel started crying and said, "Oh, Hansel, what are we going to do?" "Hush now, Gretel," said Hansel. "Don't worry, I will find a way to get us out of trouble." When his parents were asleep, Hansel got up, put on his clothes, and slipped outside. The moon was full and bright, and the little stones, which lay in front of the house, sparkled like silver pieces. Hansel bent down and filled his pockets with as many of the pebbles as he could carry. Then he went back inside and whispered to Gretel, "Sleep in peace, little sister. I have a plan which will save us." Then he went back to bed. Early in the morning, an hour before sunrise, the woman roused the two children, shaking them roughly. "Wake up, you lazy children! We have to go to the forest to gather wood," she snapped. Then she gave each of them a little pieces of bread and said, "This is your breakfast, but don't eat it too soon, because you won't get any more food today." Gretel put the two pieces of bread in her apron because Hansel's pockets were full of stones. Then they set off together to the forest. Before they reached the wood, Hansel stopped to look back at the house. He did this so often that his father became curious.
"Why do you keep stopping to look at the house?" he asked. "Watch out, you don't trip over your own legs."
"I'm looking at my white cat," replied Hansel. "He's sitting on the top of the roof and wants to say goodbye to me." "Fool!" said the woman. "That is not your little white cat. It is only the rising sun that shines on the chimney." But of course, Hansel had been really lagging behind so that he could lay a trail with the stones which he had hidden in his pockets. One by one, he dropped the pebbles on the ground. When they arrived in the middle of the forest, their father said,
"Now, you two, gather some wood, and I will make you a fire so that you will not get cold."
Hansel and Gretel, together, did as he said, and soon they had made a pile of firewood as tall as a little hill. Their father lit the fire, and when the flames were burning high, his wife said, "Children, sit close by the fire and rest. We will go further into the forest to chop trees. When we have finished, we will come back for you. Hansel and Gretel sat near the fire, and at midday they both ate their little pieces of bread. All the time they could hear the sound of an axe, so they thought that their father was not far away. But the noise did not come from an axe at all. It was only a branch which their father had fastened to a tree, blowing backwards and forwards in the wind. At last, the children's eyes closed with exhaustion and they fell sound asleep. When they finally awoke, it was already dark. Gretel began to cry and said, "How will we find our way out of the forest?" "Wait until the moon has risen," answered Hansel, hugging her. "Then we will find our way back." As soon as the moon rose, Hansel took his little sister by the hand, and they followed a path of little stones, which glittered like silver pieces, and marked the way home. It was almost daylight when they reached home. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children, where have you been all night? We thought you were lost." Their father was delighted to see them and welcomed them into the house. But it wasn't long before, once again, the children overheard the woman complaining to their father, "We only have half a loaf of bread, and after that is finished, there is nothing left to eat. We have to get rid of the children. We will take them even further into the forest, so that they cannot find their way home. There is no other solution." Their father was heartbroken and thought it would be better to share the last pieces of bread with the children instead of sending them away. But the woman did not want to hear any more about it and started to scold him until at last he gave in again. When their parents were asleep, Hansel got up and went to gather stones as he had done before. But this time the door was locked and Hansel could not go outside. Nevertheless, he comforted his little sister and said, "Don't worry, I will find a way to get us out of trouble." Early in the morning, the woman got the children out of bed and gave them each a little piece of bread, even smaller than the last time. While they walked to the forest, Hansel kept stopping to drop crumbs on the ground, crumbled from the bread he had in his pocket.
Hansel, why do you keep lagging behind?
Said his father.
Hurry up!
"I am looking at my pigeon that is sitting on the top of the roof and want to say goodbye to me," replied Hansel. "You fool!" exclaimed the woman. "That is not your pigeon. It is only the rising sun lighting up the chimney." Hansel continued to secretly drop breadcrumbs along the path. Deeper and deeper into the forest they were taken, where they had never been before in their lives. As before, their father lit a big fire for them, and the woman said, "Stay here by the fire. We are going into the forest to chop trees, and in the evening, when we are finished, we will come to take you home again." At midday, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, who had crumbled his piece along the road. Then they went to sleep. They did not awake until it was dark, and no one came to fetch them. Hansel comforted his little sister by saying, "Wait, Gretel, until the moon has risen. Then we will be able to see the crumbs I have scattered. They will show us the way home." When the moon rose, they got up, but they could not find any crumbs, because the birds that lived in the forest had eaten them all. "Never mind, we will find the way back ourselves," said Hansel. But they could not find it. They walked the entire night, and even the next day, from sunrise to sunset, without finding their way out of the forest. They were very hungry, for they had not had anything to eat other than a few wild strawberries that they had found growing by the path. At last, they were so tired that their legs could not carry them any longer, so they lay down under a tree and fell asleep. Next day, they tried again to find their way home, but still they only went deeper and deeper into the forest. Near midday, they saw a beautiful bird, as white as snow, perched on a branch and singing so beautifully that the children almost forgot their hunger as they stopped to listen. Then the bird spread its wings and flew away. The children followed the bird to a little house. When they came closer, they saw with amazement that the little house was made of gingerbread and cakes, and the windows were made of brown sugar. "This is just what we need," said Hansel. "We will make a good meal from it. I am going to start with the roof. Gretel, why don't you try some of the window?" Hansel climbed onto the roof and broke off a piece, while Gretel began to lick the windows. Suddenly, a soft voice came from inside. "Nibble, nibble, mouse, who is nibbling at my little house?" And the children answered, the wind, only the wind." They carried on eating without another thought, as they were still very hungry. Hansel, who liked the taste of the roof, tore down a large piece of it, and Gretel pushed out an entire window pane, which she then began to nibble. Suddenly the door opened and an old bent woman came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so frightened that they dropped their sweets. The old woman nodded her head and said, "My dear children, however did you get here? Come inside, stay with me in my house. You will enjoy it here." She took both of the children by the hand and led them into the little house. There she gave them a delicious meal, milk and pancakes with sugar, apples, and nuts. Then she prepared two little beds in which Hansel and Gretel were soon fast asleep, thinking they were in heaven. Now, this old woman seemed very friendly, but in reality she was a mean witch who caught and ate little children. She had built her little house of gingerbread to trap them. Then she fed them until they were fat enough to eat. This witch didn't have a very good eyesight, but she had an excellent sense of smell. When she smelled Hansel and Gretel approaching the house, she laughed an evil cackle and cried, "They will not escape!" The next morning she woke Hansel, grabbed him with her shriveled hand, and took him to a small stable where she locked him up behind a door with bars for a window. Then she went back to Gretel and shook her until she awoke. "Get up, you lazy child!" she cried. "Go and get me some water so I can cook something nice for your brother. He is in the stable and has to be fat enough. As soon as he is fat enough, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep, but all in vain. She was forced to do what the witch had ordered. The witch then prepared Hansel some of the best food, but to Gretel she gave only crab shells. Every morning the old woman crept into the stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out of your fingers so I can feel if you have become fat." But Hansel stretched out a little bone he had found on the floor, and because the witch was short-sighted, she thought it was his finger and was surprised that he was not getting any fatter. 4 weeks passed by this way. Hansel remained thin, and eventually her impatience got the better of her. One day she decided that she could not wait any longer.
Hurry up, Gretel. Bring me some water, she ordered the young girl. Whether Hansel is fat or thin, I will kill him and cook him tomorrow.
Gretel wept and wept. If the wild beasts in the forest had eaten us, we would at least have died together, she sobbed.
Spare me your whining, said the witch. It will not help you in any way.
The following morning, Gretel had to fill the big cooking pot with water and light the fire.
First, we will bake some bread, said the witch. I have heated the oven and kneaded the dough.
She pushed poor Gretel towards the burning flames that came out of the oven.
Creep inside to see whether it is warm enough so that we can put the bread in.
Gretel guessed that once she was inside, the witch would close the door and roast her to eat as well. So she scratched her head and pretended to look puzzled. I don't know how to get inside,
Oh, you stupid girls, said the witch. The opening is big enough. You see, I even fit inside it myself.
She put her head into the oven door. Gretel immediately gave a great shove and pushed the old witch right inside the hot oven. Then she shut the iron door and fastened the bolt. That soon put an end to the evil witch. Gretel ran quickly towards Hansel, opened the stable door, and cried, Hansel, we are free! The old witch is dead! How they danced with joy and hugged each other. Then, as they had nothing to be afraid of any longer, they went through the entire house, where they found all sorts of precious pearls and stones. Laughing, the two children gathered up as much treasure as they could carry. Hansel filled his pockets, and Gretel filled her apron. Now, let's go quickly. I'm sure we will now be able to find our way out of this bewitched forest, said Hansel. After they had walked through the forest for an hour or two, the children arrived at a great river. We will not be able to get over to the other side, said Hansel. I don't see a bridge or raft. There is not even a boat, agreed Gretel. But look, there is a white duck. If I ask it kindly, perhaps it will help us to cross the river. And she cried, little duck, do you see? Hansel and Gretel are waiting for thee. There's never a plank or bridge in sight. Take us across on your back so white. The duck swam towards them right away, and Hansel seated himself on its back. He wanted his sister to sit next to him. No, said Gretel, both of us will be too heavy for the duck. It will take us across one by one. When they were both safely on the other side of the river, they started walking again. As they walked, the forest became more familiar, and the children began to see things that they recognized. At last, they gave a glad cry as they saw the clearing where their own home was. Then the children began to run. They burst into the house and flung their arms around their father's neck. The man was overjoyed to see his children safe and sound. He had not known one happy hour since he had left them behind in the forest, and his wife was now dead. Gretel emptied her apron pocket, and the pearls and precious stones rolled around the room. Hansel threw one handful of jewels after another out of his pocket. At last, all their worries were over. From that day on, the family never knew a hungry day, and they all lived together in perfect happiness. The end. Thank you for listening. Until next time.